Gorosei, Saturn is able to completely regenerate from any attack, in a manner that seems to be beyond Logia's, and even beyond someone like Marco, who can be permanently damaged with enough force. Yet Saturn has been taking attacks that have devastated even a Marine Admiral and recovered without a scratch. This is something completely unseen before in One Piece, and the simplest answer would be that maybe Saturn is the product of the infamous Immortality operation. After all, besides being able to recover from all damage, we also saw that Saturn was exactly the same age and appearance 40 years ago at God Valley. The character seems to be immortal, and while it could easily be the case that all 5 of the Gorosei are simply particularly loyal servants of Imu who each had the Immortality operation done on them over the centuries, there is a far more intriguing and sinister possibility that a lot of evidence points to. Which is, what if none of them were ever human in the first place? What if instead of being celestial dragons who were promoted and granted the immortality operation, what if Imu really is the only immortal celestial dragon in the world, and instead all 5 of the Gorosei are simply his creations? What if the Gorosei genuinely are completely inhuman monsters, as has been hinted at, demonic creations of a malevolent god, designed to be similarly eternal and unkillable in order to carry out his bidding? The 3 questions that you need to ask yourself before we begin breaking this down is, would Imu really have allowed any other celestial dragons to have been made immortal? Why are the Gorosei's abilities based in demonic rituals rather than traditional devil fruit powers? And finally, how can the Gorosei communicate with each other telepathically? So to begin with, let's examine that first question. Would Imu have allowed other immortal beings to exist? Would he simply have allowed some other celestial dragons over the centuries to also get this immortality operation? To be clear, I definitely think it's possible that this is the case, as immortality surgery would be the most straightforward answer as to how Saturn is able to survive all of this, and how he was the same appearance 40 years ago. And it's entirely possible that Imu chose 5 celestial dragons to serve him forever, and had them each undergo the immortality surgery. However, based on Imu's arrogance, it seems possible that he would not want anyone else to be immortal. Not to mention, it could be a threat to his own powers if he had 5 subordinates that were all immortal themselves. On top of this, what exactly would be the process of a celestial dragon being chosen for immortality surgery? We see that even the most powerful and capable celestial dragons like Figarland Garling are not turned immortal and made into Gorosei, but are rather made a part of the Holy Knights, and someone like Figarland Garling, simply based on what we've heard, the similarities to Shanks and the implied duel with Whitebeard, was certainly strong enough to be a member of the Gorosei, yet was never promoted. So in that case, maybe it's because the Gorosei have simply been the exact same core group going back centuries, maybe even to the Void Century. Therefore, no new celestial dragons could be promoted to the group. So maybe far, far back, Imu decided on the 5 celestial dragons who would best serve him for eternity, and he had them all get immortality surgery, and that was it. But then this would be a little contradictory to what we've heard, as we were shown that the Revolutionary Army was shocked at the idea of immortality in general. They couldn't believe that there might be someone out there who has been living for ages and ages without dying. Now the Gorosei are public figures, everyone knows about them, the revolutionaries know about them, so if these 5 Gorosei have been around for literally centuries, then wouldn't everyone pretty much know that they are strangely immortal? This would be common knowledge. So on the one hand, this could simply be Oda maybe being a little loose with the logic of the story. Maybe the Gorosei have been around for centuries, maybe even from the Void Century, and just for whatever reason no one ever talked about how these 5 old guys are immortal. It wouldn't be the first time that glaringly important details are just randomly never mentioned or noted by characters. But on the other hand, if we were to assume that things are supposed to make sense, then that would mean that the Gorosei have not been around for literally centuries. So maybe they're not immortal celestial dragons going far back through history, but rather they're creations by Imu himself. Puppet-like servants that he can manufacture on a whim, that he maybe cycles out every 100 years or so. See, what's interesting is that Saturn's ability seems to allow him to transform into the Ushi Oni, a yokai with an ox's head and a spider's body. Sabo also mentions when he sees the transformed Gorosei that it is as though he's landed in hell itself, suggesting that all the Gorosei are similar monsters to Saturn. The panel of the Gorosei chasing Sabo does seem to be something straight out of a nightmare. And that finally leads to the potential of Imu's own abilities. If Luffy's Devil Fruit, which allows him to bring all of his ridiculous, imaginative ideas to life, could essentially be called the Dream Fruit, then perhaps in direct contrast, Imu's fruit would be the Nightmare Fruit. Imu's rule, after all, has been framed as the long night that the world needs to be awakened from, and considering the visual portrayal so far, Imu having the power of people's fears, in contrast to traditional devil fruits which carry the power of people's dreams, could be symbolically fitting. And all of this is to say that if Imu has the ability to bring people's nightmares to life, then what if that is precisely what the Gorosei are? Manifestations of that which people fear. See, the Ushioni that Saturn transforms into is a yokai, and yokai are essentially monsters in Japanese culture. They're not like mythical creatures like dragons, rather yokai are more so nightmarish creatures out of scary stories, similar to ghosts or vampires. Maybe all of the Gorosei's abilities are yokai based because they are not devil fruit abilities. They are not founded in mankind's dreams, but mankind's fears. This would be because Imu has the power to manifest nightmares or fears, again symbolically in contrast to Luffy. As such, Imu simply created these yokai to serve him and to be his outer face to give orders. And their true forms are in fact their yokai forms. Their human forms are simply them changing their appearance to maintain their image. One of the main reasons this seems possible is because the way the Gorosei's powers work seem to be fundamentally different than traditional devil fruits. The big tell was when Saturn didn't simply transform into his Ushi-Oni form, as any devil fruit user naturally can, but rather there was a unique demonic ritual required. We've literally never seen anything like this before. A pentagram was drawn up, from which Saturn was summoned in his demonic yokai form. There is nothing similar to this in all 1100 chapters of One Piece. Not a single Zoan fruit works like this. And what's more is that literally all of the Gorosei seem to function in the same way. They can be summoned using these pentagrams. This begs the question, what if the Gorosei aren't just humans that ate yokai devil fruits? What if the Gorosei are very literally yokai? Very literally demons created by Imu. Their yokai or their demon forms aren't devil fruit transformations, but rather their true forms. I'm not sure how else to explain their ability to be summoned through black magic, as this is something that seems to be unique to them and them alone. Not to mention another strangely unique ability that only they have, which is some form of telepathy with one another. They are all able to speak to one another and hear each other from thousands of miles away without the use of a Denden Mushi. This is just absolutely bizarre. Yet again, another ability that nobody else in the series has, that cannot be explained away with devil fruits. It seems like there is something unique to the nature of the Gorosei themselves. This even goes to how they were portrayed for the majority of the series. Prior to Egghead Island, when we finally got to deal with a Gorosei as an individual, Saturn, all previous appearances of the Gorosei featured them as a perfectly unified ensemble. Despite so many appearances, if you had asked any reader prior to Egghead Island what the personality of each Gorosei member was like, you probably wouldn't have been able to answer it, because they all speak and think remarkably similarly. Unlike every other subordinate group Oda has written in the past, where you can immediately recognize distinguishing traits in their personality and mannerisms, the Gorosei have always felt very homogeneous and uniform as a group. Even just reading all of their dialogue, it can sometimes feel like a singular string of consciousness musing to itself. There is rarely actual dissent or disagreement, just considerations and mulling over various angles of thought. There isn't even any sense of hierarchy among them. No one talks down to each other, and no one is propped up above the others. Again, in stark contrast to all other subordinate groups Oda has ever written. Combine in the fact that they are telepathic with one another, and it does feel increasingly possible that they may in fact all be puppets in a way, beings created to serve the will of their creator. Interestingly, they do literally refer to Imu as the creator. I wouldn't necessarily read too much into this line, as it could imply that Imu is the creator of the world that we see. As I talk about in this video, there is evidence that Imu may have reshaped the world, but at the same time it's entirely possible that the Gorosei refer to Imu as creator because he is literally their creator. And finally, and most interestingly, is that the possibility of the Gorosei being puppets created by Imu fits perfectly symbolically in the Egghead Island arc, as this parallels the concept of Vegapunk and his own manufactured clones. The idea of a single being who has created manifestations of his own consciousness to carry out tasks and do his bidding is nothing new after all, as this is the fascinating story of Vegapunk that we learned about at the start of the arc. What if this concept of Vegapunk that was revealed to us was just a preview of the truth behind the god of the world, that Imu and the Gorosei function much in the same way as the Stella and his satellite bodies? Not to mention, this plays into some very interesting theories regarding the potential betrayal of one of the Gorosei. While you can learn more about it in this video, readers have speculated that one of the Gorosei will ultimately defect and betray Imu, as a parallel to the story of Doflamingo and his seats, with Doflamingo once having 5 seats: Virgo, Pika, Diamante, Treble, and Corazon, before Corazon betrayed him, leaving Doflamingo with only 4. This would of course yet again play into the themes of Egghead Island, that ultimately rebellion, even by one's own creations, is simply inevitable, as one cannot suppress free will. A lesson Vegapunk of course learns as one of his own satellites, York, betrays him. Of course, this is all heading into deeply speculative territory at this point, but the main point remains that the very arc that we are finally delving into the Gorosei and their true nature as the subordinates of Imu is the very same arc that the concept of Vegapunk and his satellites is a centerpiece of the storyline. Taking into account the inexplicable history, longevity, uniformity, and seeming invincibility of the Gorosei, as well as their strangely unique powers involving black magic, summoning, and telepathy that don't fall into traditional devil fruit abilities, and the framing of the Gorosei as seemingly nightmarish monsters and genuine yokai rather than humans, the possibility that the Gorosei are in fact something completely unique and inhuman in the One Piece world, not celestial dragons at all, but rather creations of Imu himself, becomes terrifyingly likely. So let me know if you believe the Gorosei are human or Imu's creations in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear what I believe the future of the Gorosei in the story will be, then you can get my extended thoughts on my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon. Link in the description below.